Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me well? Great. It's really wonderful to see everyone in Keck tonight and to have our in-person lecture series running again. It had been a while. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Zeina Koreitem, and I'm a design faculty here at SCI-Arc and principal of Millions, a design practice in Los Angeles. And I'll be introducing tonight's lecture. In 1941, Charles Eames wrote a proposal letter to Ray Eames, Ray Kaiser at the time. It reads, "Dear Miss Kaiser, I am almost 34 years old, single and broke was underlined. I love you very much and would like to marry you very soon. I cannot promise to support us very well, but I will sure as hell try. Love, Charlie." What sounds like a typical letter written by a hopeless romantic turned out, in fact, to be a different kind of proposal, one of equal measure. A proposal for a design partnership, one that lasted a lifetime. In the end, of course, he did not need to support Ray. They supported each other. In 1972, Ralph Kaplan, author of the Eames Connections catalog, explained to his readers' surprise, quote, "They are husband and wife, and they are full collaborators." This was a point frequently underlined by Charles Eames, who spoke about the design process in their office in terms of we, us, and ours. Not that the world seemed to be really paying attention or hear it at the time. Kaplan continues, quote, "When you ask them who does what and when, they have no answer. Though Ray Eames admits that a friend once said, 'I put things in and Charles takes them out.'" This in itself is hardly remarkable to us today. We live in a time where things have shifted away from the single auteur. The fiction of the great master or the prima donna has been mostly dismantled. Architecture has never been a solitary activity, and some of the most vital practices today are evidence of that fact. On the surface, a partnership is a legal agreement, and for some, that's maybe all it ever is. But in rare cases, such as with soil, it's much more. It's life. It's tricky, it's messy, and it's nearly impossible to articulate. I'm honored to introduce Florien Idenburg tonight, architect and half of Soil. Florian has become a mentor and friend in recent years. Together with his partner, Jing Liu, they have generously shared the invaluable experience as architects who build all over the world and as partners who collaborate in all aspects of life. As someone who is not American and who has lived on different continents, but who has found myself serendipitously based here, I identify with Florian and Jing on many levels. They've taught me that a practice isn't limited to a place, that tabula rasa is overrated, that most competitions are a waste of time, that effortless architecture is not effortless at all, that acoustic ceiling tiles can make or break a project. Amongst these other things, they have shown that hard work can be done with passion and humor, that meaningful partnerships are first and foremost disagreement, and that anyone who asks, "Which partner does the design work in your office?" doesn't get it and never will. Soul's work is unfailingly beautiful, somehow always contemporary, and often marked by the delicate coexistence of contradictions. Light yet solid, thin yet thick, abstract but articulated, global but also local. Since its founding in 2008, soil has quickly become one of the most vital and relevant architecture practices working today, with a body of built projects that seems to grow daily. There are notable projects, which I think we'll hear about today: the Amant Foundation of Art, the art campus that was just completed in Brooklyn, New York; Las Americas social housing in Leon, Mexico, completed at the beginning of the year; Breathe, an experimental project with mini living in Milano, Italy; the Jan Schrem and Maria Manetti Schrem Museum of Art at UC Davis in California; the infamous Kukje Gallery in Seoul, South Korea; Frieze Art Fair in New York; and the Pole Dance Pavilion at MoMA PS1 in New York City. Seoul's recent publications include Solid Objectives, Order, Edge, Aura, published by Lars Müller in 2017, and their most recent monograph, published by A+U Japan in 2020. Florien Idenburg is a Dutch architect and co-founder with Jing Liu of the design firm Soil. For those of you who don't know, Soil stands for Solid Objectives Idenburg Liu. Idenburg studied architecture at the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. From 2000 to 2007, he served as associate architect at Sana, the firm of Pritzker Prize-winning architects Kazuyo Sejima and Ryo Nishizawa, where he was in charge of the design and realizations of two internationally acclaimed museums, the Glass Pavilion at the Toledo Museum of Art and the New Museum of Contemporary Art in New York. Florian has taught at the Harvard GSD, Columbia University, the Cooper Union, and Princeton, and is currently a professor of the practice in the Department of Architecture at Cornell University. Florian and Soil have received numerous awards, including the Emerging Voices Award by the Architectural League of New York in 2013, the Charlotte Kohler Prize, Prince Bernard Cultural Fund in 2010, and the MoMA PS1 Young Architects Award in 2009. Please join me in welcoming Florien Idenburg to SCI-Arc.
I'll put it up. There's people, and it's very exciting to give a talk in person. I don't have to ask, can you see the screen? Because I think you all can. Thank you, Zeina, for the very kind introduction. It is messy. Jing would never want to be introduced as husband and wife team, only as partners. And I will speak a little bit about that messiness, and indeed this question of auteur and the question of who and how do we actually come to projects. I will start with a little preamble, some of the stuff you mentioned, and I will show 4 projects in more detail. I've never been to SCI-Arc, interestingly enough. This is my first time speaking here, but our practice in a way started around the corner at the LA Forum when Mohammed Sharif, who was here in the room, invited us to do an exhibition, although we hadn't started our practice yet. And so very quickly we started to produce our work. And I think the sort of the speed and the messiness and the expediency is something that we thrive in and enjoy. When you say Jing and me, you also mean the rest of the team. This is right before we all ended up in lockdown in our own bubble on the roof at our annual party. So I wanted to talk about how we have always been interested in something that you can't fully control. Something that is, so we've been interested in systems, but also their sort of elasticity, their limits, the way in which they can be inhabited and occupied in ways that we had not necessarily anticipated, nor had insurance for. See how things fall, ply, form by wrapping, by shrink wrapping, by twisting, by pulling, and even sort of to the level of failure, or of sort of total embrace, if you want, by the city itself. And so where we started with a sort of maybe more traditional idea of, say, building a practice about an artistic idea that then turns into a model, maybe a computer model, a mock-up, and then Suddenly, you have to go on Alibaba to the other side of the world and weld together 500,000 rings in a little courtyard in a place 6 hours drive from Beijing in order to produce this. Or when you're fascinated by an image of sort of fragmentation and diffusion, you build a model and then you end up being in Germany in a very large factory where fully robotic plant builds these large 30-feet tubes that then get installed on the top of a building in Hong Kong. And so what I want to talk about today is not so much this idea of the single narrative, but indeed, and not so much the single line, the line that is authored and controlled, but sort of everything that comes and everything that is attached to the conception of a project at the moment that you embrace reality. And so I will show 4 projects, and I will try to show them in a detail, and I will try to show how sort of the process itself is the author, maybe, if you want, of the work. They're all 4 recent projects, and the first one is maybe the most complex, and also for us the first time that we actually have operated on a scale that we hadn't operated on before, which is a master plan. A master plan we are working on, because a master plan, it's not really a master plan because we don't believe in masters and we don't believe in plans. So it's more a strategy, but sort of something that will last for maybe 20, 30, if not 40 years. And it is at the Niagara Falls. It's in upstate New York. And the concept of time and the concept of how to embrace sort of these long processes is one of the things that really affects the thinking of this project. So the Niagara Falls is obviously as old as we know, but it used to be, this is an old map of the Niagara Falls. It used to be all the way at the end of the map here to the left. This is an advertisement somewhere from the 30s to bring tourists to the Niagara Falls. The Niagara Falls is obviously the border between Canada and the United States at this moment in history. It was shared land prior, and this waterfall has been sort of carving out, if you want, this gorge. And so if we go all the way to the left here, you see a site, and this is the site where this project resides, which is Artpark, and I will get to that in a little bit, for which we are currently working on sort of a longer-term strategy. But if you go into the past and you start digging sort of how that place became what it is now, you realize an incredible amount of complexity. I think it's important to see that sort of the Niagara Falls used to be here, and so gradually it sort of has been, over tens of thousands of years, been eroding backward upstream, if you want. And this is at the edge of this slope. This is the site we're talking about. Also, there used to be here a Indian village, as it was described in the 30s, and we will get to that in a little bit. What is also really important is that the entire economy of New York State, is predicated on the hydropower that comes from the Niagara Gorge. And so this project, the site, the history, or the more recent history of our site starts when in 1956, one of the main power stations collapsed. The US was coming out of the war. Suburbia needed to be funded and goods needed to be produced. And the upper Western New York region was a powerhouse of industry. And as soon as this collapsed, basically there was no power anymore. And industry started to move. Nelson Rockefeller was at that moment the governor. And he, as you see at the plaza he had built in Albany, the capital of New York State, knew what to do. He called Mr. Power Broker himself, Robert Moses. He said, we need to get the power back. The power needs to be fueling the sort of post-war boom and the industry in upper and western New York. And so within 3 years, the Alta Vista power plant was built. It was the fastest, it was the largest hydropower station in the Western Hemisphere. And Robert Moses got it done, and here they are 3 years later turning on power, turning the power back on, so to say. But in order to do that, they had to remove two settlements of First Nations, the Tuscarora Nation and another nation. Their land was actually the land you see behind here. They fought it. They brought it to the Supreme Court because obviously the First Nation settlers had been living in this area for the longest time. And here you see the Tuscarora Nation. They went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court did say ultimately that the power of New York State is more important than the right to the land that these populations had had for many, many years. And so as they were digging, and this is post-war, and there was a lot of earth movement happening. Here you see the lake. Here you see our site at the end of that gorge. Also in that time during the war, the Manhattan Project had happened up there, and there was a uranium backfill. And so since there was so much earth movement and this whole almost like waste management of this whole area, that's actually what gave shape to this hill, which is what turned into Artpark. Here you see the lake. Here you see the landfill where it was dumped in a town called Lewiston with the truck path. They also encountered a mount from the Hopewell Nation. They avoided backfilling the land there. But here you see sort of the aerial picture from before the fill and the backfill here of the land and the mount, the burial mount from the Hopewell Nation. Rockefeller thought, which is often thought, and this is a little bit later, but it was the emergence of land art, and artists were invited to use this backfill of this excavation to experiment. Not every artist in New York City was able to go to the west and dig craters or drive motorcycles, and many of the artists had to move upstate New York, and this is really considered one of the main birthplaces of the land art and environmental art movement. And so, for instance, Martha Clark, he reenacted, if you want, the collapse of the station in a performance piece at the edge of the slope. The sort of embrace of this depth, the topography and the soil, and sort of the history that is buried, if you want, within that land was an inspiration. Nancy Holt, the Robert Smithson's partner, with beautiful sort of cylinders that go into the ground, and also from a more architectural point of view, Ant Farm, who dug a time capsule here in this soil. And maybe the most sort of aggressive and the most macho Chris Burden's beam drop, where he dug a hole, filled it with concrete, and with a big crane dropped these beams in. And so this idea of the engagement with the earth and the soil, which has all sort of backfill started at that moment in history. Over time, it became more popular, and there was funding. A local politician liked opera. He built a theater for 2,500 people, although there's only 500 people living in the village. There was participatory art, and in 1985, it was a really famous, really sort of great draw within the region. And you see here sort of also the topography and the land. Gradually, when Rockefeller lost his power, the funding dried up, and the whole area, although still very much a park, is pretty much abandoned at this moment. And so we were asked through an interview and a competition together with West 8, a landscape designer, and Charcoal Blue, a theater designer, to figure out what to do with this site. How, in a way, can we rethink this? And so with all this history, and I should say, I will get to that in a little bit, how would we address making a plan? Indeed, there is no tabula rasa, there is no empty land, there is so much embedded within it. The site is very beautiful, the views are very beautiful, there is a sort of intimate aspect of the gorge where you can get very close to the water, and at higher plateaus, at some point you can see Canada, but it is quite empty and quite desolate. The only thing that remained for the art was 12 classic rock concerts that happen annually, and that's also their only source of income. And so the question was, how do you bring back a sort of a larger program, if you want, a larger audience, and also really make the site part of the experience again? We started to visit the concerts. We saw Sammy Hagar and Jason Bonham, the son of John Bonham. We went to listen to all the old-timers, and in some way, I should say, the director said it very simple. Our audience is dying, our acts are dying, what should we do? But apart from just listening to the people that had in some way occupied or claimed or taken over this land in the last 20 years, we also walked the site with representatives of the various First Nations. And interestingly enough, from their perspective, the best thing to do was to do nothing, to don't touch the land, to not start again moving earth, not again start sort of digging and transforming this place, but in some way just let it rest. And so we felt we could not come up with a master plan that would change or radically add another layer to this, but actually we thought, is there not a way to make this complex history, this layered history, all these different sort of settlements of time, in some way tangible for an audience? Is there a way to deal with this idea of the section? Is there a way to sort of take people through these, through these layers into the soil, if you want, frame nature? And these are a number of vignettes, and I should say maybe you saw an image of a big book we made. But this is not a master plan, but it's really sort of a series of interventions, a strategy of things that could be done in order to heighten, so to say, an awareness with the audience of what is that layered and complex history that has taken place here. And also this embrace, in a way, of the artificiality of the land. This is not beautiful nature. This is not in a romantic landscape. It's not a park to escape, if you want, from say, a context. But in some way, it is representative, if you want, of man acting on Earth. It's owned by the power authority. The power authority remained the sort of responsible person for this land. And there is a real drive towards working to a more sustainable and bringing hydro, solar, and other types of power in there. And so this idea also of something that is a little bit more future forward is also something we wanted to introduce through these this imagery and these vignettes that were guiding principles for a series of interventions. I will not show all the interventions, and I will not show too much of the process, but I wanted to highlight one project that is now moving forward that in some way try to illustrate how we are trying to bring back sort of the legacy of this land, the history of this land, and also bring it forward with a new proposition. And so one thing is that we use the truck route as an organizing path on the site itself, so that as you move through the site, you're actually following the truck route that the trucks that dumped the soil used to get down the gorge. And this truck route wraps through the new amphitheater, which is the one thing we're going to construct first. It's a 10,000 it's a 10,000 people amphitheater, which is basically sort of a betterment and an improvement of the current setup. This is their main revenue stream, and this will also be the thing that will help them expand and grow afterwards. And this artificiality, since we cannot dig, and since we don't want to dig, we started to think, how can we create this amphitheater as sort of a series of super, say, artificial hills that also are really attractive when nothing is happening there, when there's no concert, but also throughout the year, to attract also different types of audiences who are not just coming for the concert. So this idea of artificial knolls, if you want, that suddenly can be occupied if something happens. And together with West 8, we developed a strategy of making these knolls that we can really shape into this bowl that then becomes the theater itself. The seating, basically, a sort of a natural vineyard seating, if you want, with all different capacities, even accessibility, egress, and what have you. Shaping it along the hill, looking towards the bandshell here at the edge of the gorge. And so most of the year, when nothing is going on, it is this landscape that people can walk through and walk in between. And then sometimes when the events happen, it will be occupied, turn into this venue. And then the band shell itself, playing with sort of a structure with an inflatable cover, one that generates energy. But basically, when there's nothing going on, it's just this a structure standing on the edge of the gorge, and only when there are events, it becomes this canopy and it covers the site. So this is ongoing. We actually recently got a first approval to move forward with a first intervention. And to celebrate that, we recycled a pavilion we recently built for the High Museum on the site where the future band shell will be. From New York, we moved to France, to northern France, to the Alsace, Vosges, a different gorge, a different series of mountains and rivers. Really is very low risk. Very right at the north east corner, if you want, really the armpit, so to say, of France, an area that also often used to be German, sort of on the border of the Rhine, close to Strasbourg. Which is the birthplace, if you will, or at least one of the very important regions where in Europe glass and glassmaking came from. And so it was there because there is water, there are minerals in the soil, there is a lot of wood for fire, and then air, the last element that the human could bring in order to make glass. And glass used to be made by families that moved from site to site in a sort of nomadic setting, wherever the soil and the wood was available. And so they moved through, this is like 1400, 1500s, they moved through these areas and through these mountains. And only sort of in the 16 and 1700s, they started to settle in this place on the right, which is our site, Meisenthal. Meisenthal, founded by a family, the Walters, three brothers, basically, who settled in this town, and over the course from 1703, generation through generation, family through family, grew this place into one of the main producers of glass. Famously also a place where the glass or the Christmas ornament has been invented. And so the history of this place is very old, and I show very quickly the site, how it's sort of shaped over time by addition, transformation, manipulation, erasure, demolition, till not today, but the day that we were invited to think about it and help transform this place and bring back, in a way, the sort of history and the legacy of this glass, but for an international glass center. It was a competition, it was a public competition, and we happened to win with our proposal. And here you see it right at the time of the competition, the factory at the center of the town, really the town square, if you want. There's a total of 230 people living in the town, but this factory as really the sort of core, because that's the genesis of this place. And so the question was how to sort of bring back and make this an attractive destination. There was at that time 3 independent organizations using the site. So the large factory hall was used seasonally for concerts, very much like Artpark. In the middle, you see some structure with an orange roof. That's where the glass studio, sort of artistic glass studios were. And then there's this old building that had the history of this company, Meisenthal, as its sort of, small collection of artifacts that showed the history of this place. And so the brief was, how do we bring these 3 separate organizations together in a much more strong, central and organized site? And we thought of these 4 elements and the idea of how to bring sort of the fluidity, if you want, almost of the ground and use this idea of the molten earth as a way to generate maybe a new sort of landscape. The idea that we could bring together all these different organizations in this singular sort of land. The idea that the ground itself in some way would form a tapestry, if you want, that would organize these three separate organizations on a new common ground. It would allow also to unify all the entrances because they were at different levels on the hill, and really create sort of a more common area in the middle, which used to be the factory yard, and now would be sort of a common public space in the middle. And by lifting the ground, and you'll see there was an old ruin here, there we could introduce a cafe, entrance pavilion, education pavilion, and sort of visitor amenities. And now sort of the three separate organizations are sort of unified within this one space. And so although they are still separately legible sort of on this new landscape, if you want, they underground are all sort of connected, and there was a lot of sort of infrastructural upgrades that needed to happen. We introduced a black box theater here for concerts that could open to the large hall. It needs dressing rooms, organization, entrance over there. Similarly, the museum has its new entrance under this ground, and also the glassmaking studio in here, the old ruin that we sort of transformed and into this visitor center. And so here again, we're working not on an empty site. We're working on a site with centuries of history. And then adding to this, in some way, it's not that you're making a new project. It's really that you're adding on this layers and layers of human intervention. And so we use the same act in a way of adding, subtracting, editing, building up, building under, continuing and discontinuing, so to say. And so when you find the site now, when you arrive driving through the hills, suddenly it sort of appears, and it is not completely clear what is old and what is new, and how does our layer, which is a single layer in a longer history, add to this constellation of spaces. And so here, for instance, the landscape sort of covering, if you want, the old one of the ruins that now is actually transformed into the visitor center and the ticketing and education center. And then you enter under the landscape here into this common courtyard. So the land lifts up, if you want, and you see the old factory, the old train track is still here. This is the old glass-blowing studio. We reused two old structures and reclad them to make new glass workshops there. Here, the visitor center with education center. And so you can sort of walk in, under, over, and around this landscape, and unifying these three organizations into this single landscape. At some point, also on higher levels, connecting from the museum straight to the glassmaking facility, and then ramping down again. Here you see the old museum, which we restored, beautiful roof, but the entrance sort of under the landscape in. The black box theater is very flexible. It can be a closed space for 200 people, but then the back stage, actually a big door, opens up to the entire hall. And so sometimes they reverse the stage, and actually the stage and the acts, they perform towards the back, and there can be 5,000 people in a standing concert. And so again, sort of this idea, not just as operating in the middle of an empty site, not starting from scratch, but really thinking about how to continue, certain lines, if you want, of history. This is some recent shots in the what is it? I think October. Last week. Mexico, 50% of the Mexican population lives in informal housing, which means they build their own, it's like self-built homes. And so there was a desire, or there has been for a number of decades, a desire to formalize that part of the population. And Infonavit is like the Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, if you want, of Mexico. So they provide mortgages so that people become a homeowner. And they designed a system in which developers can residents can get a home, and it's backed up by the government. And this has produced a landscape of millions and millions and millions of homes that look like this, an endless landscape, if you want, throughout the country. But this has to be built on a very cheap land, very far from the city, for the economic model to work. And what it means that although it is great on the sort of the national level, it's very tough for mayors and for cities because they can't reach so far at the periphery of their cities to service them for transportation, for trash pickup, for security, for schools, for power, and what have you. And so we, at some point through somebody else, were asked to come to the city of León in Mexico. The city of León, Mexico, is the fastest growing sort of industrial city. It's called the Inner Harbor of Mexico. It's 3 hours north of Mexico City. And where Detroit shrinks, León grows because it is where the car industry is, and it's sort of one of the strongest attractors of migrant workers in Latin America. And so behind there you see a Honda factory. The airport is bilingual, Spanish and Japanese. And so this city is attracting a lot of new energy, and it also meant that a lot of informal settlements happen sort of at the periphery of the city. And so we were asked to help them think about what can we do to transform or find a new sort of typology that meets in a way the economic reality of really the working class, the sort of people that need to be helped in their residential needs. And so we were invited by IMOVI, which is the Institute for Housing, for the mayor of León, to help them think through, can we think of a new typology that can happen within the center of the city that is very, very economical, but actually allows these people to stay close to transportation, close to jobs, close to commerce, and what have you. And so we organized a game. We made actually a game, and we had all the stakeholders, so the mayor's office, but also the housing authority, contractors, banks, landowners, and everybody just make their best scheme, what they could imagine. We asked for 2 possible sites, and we asked them to themselves actually show from their point of view what would be the ideal solution. Obviously, this is the one that the developers came up with. They said, we just need to maximize and we just need to build as many houses as we can. But then there were other people that were more concerned about green, open space, parking, and what have you. This was a success, and so they then asked us, why don't you guys do one to show how that can be done? Efficiency is often achieved by a certain typology, which is the double-loaded corridor, which is a very efficient way to have a lot of people. The units are the black, the yellow is the circulation, be organized within a single building. It's a very unattractive one from an experience point of view. It's also one that for the people who mostly were prefer to build their own house and be connected to the ground would be a challenging one, because it's something that disconnects you very much from the ground. Sort of the distance from the ground to your unit gets sort of stretched by this double-loaded, dreadful corridor. So we tried to think, can we introduce something that is more common and more communal, like a courtyard, or maybe 2? And can we find a way in which the journey to your home is not always the same and not so monotonous, but actually one that is meandering, and maybe there's choices of how you can go home. The other thing we thought is we should not build a building that is so large that you don't recognize where you live, so that people would still be able to indicate within this larger complex, hey, I live there up at the higher level or at this other point. So the challenge here was to figure out a way to make a porous, open building that had a very tight budget. 60 units for $2.5 million was the challenge. But it also has sort of a character, a personality that would people be excited about living here. And so through a series of workshops with the housing authority and actually with possible future residents, because they would become the owners of this house, we worked through and we came up with this scheme. And so the scheme is in a way a sort of a lemniscate form, like where you enter through this smaller courtyard, and there's a large courtyard. They organized around the center. There's like basically a circulation loop, if you want, that allows you to find different ways to your home. All is single loaded, which means although the apartments are small, they're 500 and 700 square feet, so roughly 50 square meter, 70 square meter, 2-family, 3-family, or 3-bedroom. So 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom. They have cross ventilation through the courtyard, and a lot of natural light from both sides. And then there is an additional stair that wraps up to the top of the building, and we omitted a few units that can be used as common spaces for the people to enjoy a sort of collective. And here you see that single-loaded corridor, and the challenge with that is that people might be staring into your unit, right? So often a window to the courtyard or to a corridor is what people find problematic. And so we thought we curve and we rotate these panels in order to have much more oblique views that people are not like staring straight into your home. And we thought it needs to be very efficient and very economically feasible. So we thought, why don't we precast the building, and we make everything out of precast panels. Very quickly it can be built. We asked for a mock-up, but eMovie was very nervous about this idea of this precast. And they made a mock-up. On the left, they said, this is what we prefer. On the right, they said, this is our precast mock-up. And we said, it doesn't really look like a precast mock-up. They said, yeah, no, we really didn't succeed. It was really hard. And then after a while, they said, you know what it is? In order to get one of these precast panels installed, we have to work with a company that's 4 hours away drive. We need, there's one guy who can make it. There's a truck that needs to drive to the site. There's a crane that needs to lift the panel in place. To get one panel in place, we can have 30 people work for 30 days on the project. And so then we said, well, okay, wouldn't it be better to involve a larger community in making this building rather than having this one guy who owns the truck and one guy who owns the crane and one guy who owns the plant basically get all the money of this budget. One worker in Mexico can carry maximum 17 kilos by law. So we could not make anything that was more heavy than 17 kilos. So we thought, what if we built this wall up out of units, block units, that are exactly 17 kilos. And so we worked and we experimented, because also it needed to sort of accommodate this sinuous form. If you wanted, we needed to keep it simple. So we ended up with 2 blocks, basically a standard block, which is this one, which can sort of stretch as long as you want. And then a pentagonal block, which irregular angles that acts as a hinge. So whenever it has to take a corner, it can hinge and it can sort of lock in, because the windows, we had one window type, needs to always be at a 90 degree. So this black, hinge point in a way allows to sort of accommodate the curve, whereas the standard gray can sort of extend as much as you want. And it is exactly 5 of them stacked was the ceiling height we had, and 17 kilos. So we made a mock-up, and that worked. And actually, we liked much better. It had much more texture. In some way, you saw really also the hand, if you want, in the final element, and it had this sort of texture and touch that we did not think we could achieve with the precast. And so this is how it's built. It opened indeed in April this year, and the families moved in. And so you see it here next to the park. Here's one of these open spaces where people can see their kids playing. On Sunday, there's market that gets immediately fully occupied and embedded within the context. This is where they're setting up the market earlier in the morning. And so you come in here through this door. The first is sort of the more intimate courtyard that you experience, and from then in the sort of public open ground floor, you get into the larger courtyard. Here you see the stair that wraps up all the way, and some of these open areas up here where there is a vertical connection back into the smaller courtyard, which is taller, with a staircase that takes you up one of the units. And so the entire facade is actually this one stone. The climate is very attractive. You don't have to put insulation, actually purely natural ventilation because of the altitude of where the town is, and so it's all naturally ventilated. The corner we wanted to make strong and have a sort of clear identity within that, landscape of self-built homes. This is the denser center of the city, but obviously also here everything had grown over time within this context. Now there's two other. So this is a prototype, and there's two other firms working on projects of a similar scale in the context here. One is the site next to us. I'm going to end with a last project, and I think some of the lessons around sort of process, around labor, around time, are changing maybe the way we're thinking about the way we make our work, and in some way maybe the sort of anyway, we'll see where it goes. But I think this is a project that just opened, or is actually still sort of in the process of opening. It opened over the last year in phases. And I think it shows an attention to materiality and to labor and an interest in that that I think will continue to develop in our practice. It's in Bushwick. Bushwick is sort of the anti-Manhattan, if you want. It's like the industrial area where a lot of art and mostly manufacturing spaces are, but obviously also now art studios and what have you. And our client was interested in making a space that would support the artist. It is a private organization, and often when with private initiatives in the arts world, they want to make a museum of their own collection. But this client, this lady, Lonti Evers, she said, no, what can I do to support the artists? How can we make a space where the artists can feel at home, where they can work, where they have a resource, a space to produce, to think, just to support them so that New York still remains a place where artists can come and be. The site, this is a picture of the existing site, of one of the sites. So it's three sites actually connected. So this is Grand Street, this is Mojer Street, this is Ten Eyck in Bushwick, and it's this lot, and this lot. Next door to a very large mini storage that's very dominant, you'll see it. It's a big yellow box. Here used to be a Chinese stone cutter, and on the other side of the street, and the site, the other side was empty when we got involved. And so the challenge in some way was in this very sort of industrial area of truck body shops, there's a poultry abattoir and some other functions along the street. How do you create a place where the artist can feel comfortable and in some way at home? Spaces for art generally are boxes, right? They are generally just spaces where people can work, both the studio spaces and the gallery spaces. And so the program is a series of boxes, if you want. Galleries, indeed, 3 galleries, 1, 2, 2, and 3. Artist studios and a sort of really simple project room space where artists could use the space for installations, for dance performance, and what have you. And so what we thought we would do first is try to introduce a more human scale, if you want, in the urban organization by taking the most by using courtyards and sort of alleyways to introduce a secondary level of urbanism, if you want. Most of the neighboring buildings are fully built warehouses with a garage door. And so we thought, how can we sort of scale down and in some way create a piece of city, a campus, rather than a building? We decided to connect all the way through Grand Street to the other block, so that there is sort of a new street, public street, that moves through the block. And along that path, certain events, courtyards, and other places happen. And the most public programs, the performing arts space and the bookshop, which is also a place where you can get a coffee, we put in the middle of the block in a sort of Berlin idea where you bring the public through a courtyards into the sort of center of the block to create a new type of experience. And then the boxes themselves, in some way, are very. We had to think about how to give those quite neutral, simple boxes a certain amount of detail, a certain amount of say particularity. In some way, maybe introduce a certain history or a certain element of time, as if they had been expanded or grown over time into that as well. One of the things we did, and you see these are the different facades, so it's not a test, but they look very straightforward. This is the artist residency 1 and 2. We introduced a horizontal datum to in some way reduce the height also of the spaces and to create sort of a more intimate relationship with the ground and the people there. And the other thing we worked on sort of finding a way to add texture and materiality and differentiate between these layers with this horizontal datum. And so I will take you now, this is really the first time I'm showing this, and it's not a very polished story necessarily, but I want to show sort of how we worked this detail and the craft, if you want, into the project, corrugated texture at the top and a smooth texture at the bottom. The introduction of sort of particular moments and details. One window, which is actually the window you can see all the way through the block at the end of this alleyway. We tested many forms and then decided on this one. It became known as the potato window. There's the form, because how do you make a window this shape in concrete? We sort of shaped it. Here you see it introduced into the form work, and as it comes out, the glass itself is larger than the opening. So here you see the glass sitting behind that form, because we would not cut the glass in that shape. Here you see the shape after the form came out, and you'll see later how it turned out. The other building we worked on a different way to introduce texture and particularity, if you want, by taking, and I forgot to say, we used very contextual and simple materials, brick, steel, concrete, but we tried to see how can we manipulate them. This is an ordinary brick, and we started to work with just mocking up, so to say, how could we produce sort of a different texture. It's actually a brick that is smooth on 2 sides and rough on 2 other sides, and so we organized the entire building in this organization. So every face is actually unique. Some has 2 rough sides, the other is half rough, half smooth, and the back is fully smooth. And so every brick was drawn and indicated. The corners were complicated to solve. How do you produce openings within it? So everything was mocked up and sort of a trial and error, and that's how we created this volume that is completely made out of this single rotated block. And then the last building, which is actually an existing building that we transformed, works with the brick as the back of the brick to create this unified pattern. The bricks, they get extruded, and in their process they leave score marks. And normally you don't see them because they're on the inside of the wall, but here we rotated it, and so that creates a sort of smaller pattern of the brick. And Unistrut as a fence that unifies the entire campus. We tried also on the ground to unify the entire ground of the campus through this patterning in the concrete. So we made a custom rake and worked and trained basically these guys of how to introduce this very somewhat random but still very much designed pattern of graded concrete. And here you see them sort of drawing in the concrete, unifying the landscape throughout the different buildings and sites. And here you see how it ended up. And one last area of particularity was the sort of outside spot for this is where the artist studio has their kitchen. They can come out and sit here in the landscape in this figure where we brought waste, if you want, and things we found from the site in some way sort of a almost dystopian land, but we sort of cast it in the concrete, and so you see it now in the patterns, these traces of the stuff that was on site into the ground. So let me take you through. This is the entrance on Grand Street, and we created also these courtyards as buffers between the street and the gallery space. So you come in on the right through the door. There's a little courtyard and a glass door that brings you into this lobby, which you see here. The brick switches from one rotation to the other side as you come in. The pattern of the ground continues in, and then there's a step into the gallery. The gallery is here. From the gallery, there's a courtyard that brings you to the bookshop, which is sort of a real resource. And out of this bookshop, which is here on the left, you come into this first courtyard between the two buildings. Here we're looking back at the bookshop. These are very recent pictures taken, I think, yesterday by Naho Kubota. Still the big camera of the contractor there to control. This is the other building. You see the datum. There is a grating on the top. Behind that, there are at some places skylights, so it cuts the direct light, but it lets the light still go through. And here you see the sort of marquee. It's a balcony for the offices above, but it's also a way to indicate where the entrance is of the gallery building, and the soffit with aluminum that sort of reflects the light. And moving forward to the next street, we arrive at the artist residency building. Maybe you are attracted by this light at the end of that path. And it bends in just slightly towards the entrance, and it invites you into this courtyard. This is on the left, the artist residency building. On the back, the project room and project space. Here, the curved volume of the library peeking out. This is a sort of a reading nook, a quiet space where the artist can just sit. The nice thing is that they don't have to produce anything. There's no mandate to do anything. The only question that is asked for them is to just be here and think. And so this is the last image. And maybe I'll leave it at that. Thank you.